Hi, it's Craig from Craig's To-Do List. This is our first official book podcast. So I have this really super clever name called Craig's To-Do List Book Buzz. And so I'm going to interview and talk to local authors. And my first guest is a local author, James C. Harberson III. I'm going to call him Jim. Jim writes horror and comedy together. Jim is a Watertown native. And Jim, want to talk a little bit about your background and how you got into writing?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. And I'm delighted to be here. And the fact that you've chosen me as your sort of sacrificial lamb, your first, your maiden voyage, I'm also grateful for that.
Right. So if anything goes wrong, we're blaming you because you're our first guest.
I just assumed I was going to be blamed for everything. So, Anyway, yeah, I've always been into writing since I was a kid. I didn't do a lot of fiction writing until 2011. Before that, I used to be a lawyer.
Sorry to hear that.
I was primarily a civil rights and criminal defense lawyer. And I wrote a lot of didactic stuff like legal briefs, and I did op-eds for newspapers, but I didn't earnestly get into fiction writing until 2011 when I started writing screenplays. And then in roughly about 2015, I got together with my co-author, Fraser Rice, and we wrote a screenplay called Stay Alive, which is the basis of my first book, the graphic novel Stay Alive. And we gradually put it together and had it published by Marcosia, a British publisher, in 2020. And they've published all of my books. I'm grateful to Harry Marcos, the president of Marcosia, for taking a chance on me again and again. And I haven't really looked back. I don't practice law anymore. I just sort of try to live in this weird alternate reality where my ideas come from.
Let's talk a little bit about your genre and how have you always been into this really inventive, imaginative, weird, whatever the right word is. Some people call it speculative fiction, which is a word I could barely pronounce, let alone spell. But basically, you love combining horror with comedy, and this is something that is not easy to do. And I'm curious, like, when you approach a subject, do you first think, "Oh, this is funny," or do you first think this is scary, or do you not? Or is it just a combination of both?
I think it's like, was it Aristotle who said that, tragedy and comedy are the same thing? It's a matter of emphasis. And I sort of see it both ways at once. If it's really exploitative and terrible and, it's like a real person suffering, that's not funny generally. But if it's in fiction especially, or it's a movie, or it's something maybe that happened hundreds of years ago, it's easier to see it from a more distanced perspective, from a more, I don't want to say objective, but, a less emotional one in terms of sympathy. And then that's when the humor takes over. And I realize that a lot of people use humor to deflect the horror of real life, and I have to confess that I do that all the time. And so I prefer humor and horror in part because I love both, but also because I can't imagine horror without some humor in it. It's too much. It's like pornography otherwise. The real world is scary and horrible enough. And if you just show horror, I don't see a lot of point to that. Even if it's really well executed, like I said, if you've seen a car crash, there's nothing funny about that. Right? If you're creating something that references terrible things, you should put some kind of larger imprimatur on it or meaning. That's your job as an artist. And that's where speculative fiction comes in. I think that I just read a definition. You asked me, what's speculative fiction? And I said, I'm going to look it up just to be sure. And I came across this definition online that said that it is, I guess it's sort of up for grabs, but the essential difference is that it's not what's called mimetic fiction. Right. Mimetic is true to life, and speculative fiction is thing, it's genre fiction like horror or science fiction or fantasy, things that, take liberties with the laws of nature or physics or what have you. And that's what I like to do. I mean, not everything I write is quote unquote speculative fiction. I mean, I write some crime fiction too, and some just straight up horror fiction. And that is somewhat, you could say that's somewhat true to life, like true crime is true to life. But even true crime is more of an emphasis on the darker aspects of life instead of maybe just more mundane human dramas.
Right. So, and I think part of speculative fiction definition, which is kind of like, that's a fairly new literary term, is the idea, like you said, it doesn't deal with the real world. It deals with an outworldly world, a different kind of world. And and there's an element of outrageousness sometimes with this genre. And I'm wondering if, I want to talk about your graphic novel here, which I love, Stay Alive. This is, talk a little, so going on your whole take, speculative fiction and horror and comedy, there's a kind of a social commentary element in this particular graphic novel. And it has a prescient with fame and things like that. How important is a social commentary angle or a reflection on social in your work, or specifically in horror and comedy? Do you think that's what makes it stand out a little bit more, if it has like a kind of a tweak, a social commentary tweak?
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's an aphorism that's appeared in different ancient authors. It was attributed, not exactly in this wording, but to the Roman playwright Terence, homo homini lupus, which loosely translated means man to other men as a wolf. And it's about man's inhumanity to man. And that animates a lot of my thinking, because we live in a society where people do things at arm's length, but that enables them to do things that are not exactly sociopathic, but sometimes sociopathic. And it's perfectly legal, but it's still terrible and dehumanizing. And, it's not the business of the law generally to interfere with those relationships, often which are contractual, but still, you can't ignore the terrible things that can issue forth from that. So Stay Alive is about this idea that a Hollywood starlet who's down on her luck could get a reality show based on the fact that serial killers are hunting her and trying to kill her. And it's legal, but the question is, should you do it? And she submits herself not just to exploitation by the network that has paid her to do this, but also by exploitation to everyone watching and people online. And people often talk about the fact that being able to comment online on social media has a dehumanizing effect. It looks like it's sort of ironic. It looks like conversation and interaction, but it isn't. And so people's worst instincts flower forth, and people say terrible things they'd never say to your face in real life, and it transforms people into their possibly worst self because they're protected by anonymity, and it's because it's so dehumanizing. You don't look at the other person as a human being. It's like, apparently the military, when it's training soldiers, teaches them to dehumanize the enemy because it's that much easier to kill the enemy if the enemy is not a human being. And so there's a similar dynamic with social media. So what this starlet does is she capitalizes on her fame and also the fame of this corporation called UKILL that basically holds a lottery for murder, and they allow anyone in the world to nominate anyone to be murdered, and they put each nominee to a popular vote, and whoever gets the most votes gets murdered. So the protagonist in Stay Alive, Jane Morgan, gets herself voted to the top of the list by foiling a cancer kid's professional or Major League Baseball home run experience by tagging him out at home plate while dressed as the opposing team's mascot. And she becomes the head of the show, or rather the star of the show, and her the odds that she will survive more than 48 hours are very low. And so everybody's watching. It's like the people who go to NASCAR events waiting for the car crash, right? And so the story unfolds in which there are multiple attempts on her life, and she finally surrenders herself and agrees to play the final game with Yukil, in which she is stalked by a serial killer who once tried to kill her before. And Yukil says, if you survive this, we get the streaming rights, but you get to go free. We'll call off the contract on your life. And so that's the third and final act of the story. She finally owns the responsibility for all the horror that she's created in the first 2/3 of the book.
One thing I really like about, well, maybe I have a wrong assessment, but I sort of see you, how do I put it? Sitting over in the corner, snickering a little bit, coming up with these ideas, right? So one thing I really like about this idea, it's so outrageous. So to us, it's really outrageous. And you're kind of like saying, okay, well, I'm going to come up with the most outrageous idea. How important is it for you, for people to be like, SMH, shake my head, like that's wild? And how important is it for you to test yourself? Like, what world can I create? What story can I create that just seems so impossible? But there's such an element of, oh my God, am I watching this? Am I liking this element to it? Do you see what I'm saying? How motivated are you by the idea that like, this is really fun to write this, and I'm like a little kid and I'm weird and this is fun?
Yeah, I'm
So I guess I'm trying to say is like, I get, you have such an intelligent voice and your work is so intelligent. But the part I like about it is, maybe because I'm a writer too, is this idea that like you're tittering over in the corner and someone is shaking their head after reading your book and you sort of just kind of raised an eyebrow or pushed a button or just want somebody to have fun.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, part of me will always be that 13-year-old snickering in the corner at the outraged adults who are frozen in social propriety and often incapable of seeing anything outside of the most literal meaning. I like to call it the Beavis and Butthead hermeneutic, in which, people find obscene meanings in all sorts of everyday words. And I've never gotten over that. I will always be that guy, and I'm not going to apologize for it. And I also have a subversive streak as an artist, and as a person, I'm just naturally skeptical. So I love to take things that subvert social ideas, or rather social conventions, norms, accepted moral positions, and invert them or show how they can be abused in different ways, sort of unexpected consequences of supposedly well-intentioned things. And I've always been like this. I remember in 6th grade, I was in health class, and for some reason, the teacher decided to show us this anti-drunk driving propaganda film. And it was really ridiculous. I think it was called License to Kill, and in it, this alcoholic rich guy is driving around in his convertible. I think he's actually drinking while wearing this expensive watch and bracelets and his, shirt and tie. And he crashes into the Dodge Omni driving, I think, Harvard-bound high school valedictorian who's just given her valedictory, right? And the Dodge Omni is her graduation present. And so there's the crash, and for some reason she's not wearing a seatbelt, but they don't dwell on that. And she comes up to the windshield of the car, and right before she smashes through it, they freeze the image, and then I think it fade to black. It says, "License to Kill," right? And so the whole thing was kind of like Jack Webb's propagandistic dragnet shows in the 60s. And I just couldn't help but laugh. And the teacher came up to me and said that I could wait in the hall if I couldn't behave like an adult. And I was like.
And did you say I'm not an adult?
No, I just kept laughing, I think. But
and you still aren't an adult?
I never was. But I think in that respect, I was more of an adult than she was.
Right. Well, I definitely think there's an element of subversiveness and societal, like what is norm and societal. I mean, most writers, I don't know if this is the case with you. As a writer myself, I constantly feel like an outsider. I constantly feel a little bit like a freak walking down the street because what I think is important or what I think is not what other people think is important. So I think that is really helping you approach just your material. Let's talk a little bit about the collection of novellas.
Yeah, comorbidities.
Comorbidities, which is difficult for me to pronounce. But I like this one because it has cats in it. And everyone knows I'm a cat lover. You seem to have a cat theme going in some of your stuff. Talk a little bit about the novellas in this and how this came about. Were these original short stories? Did you envision them as graphic novels, or were they always sort of like longer stories?
They started out as screenplays. In 2017, I just sat down. I was like, how many screenplays can I write in 1 year? Because a friend of mine who's a screenwriter said that he knew a guy who'd written 10 in 1 year. And I was like, I'm not sure I could pull that off, but let's see what I can do. So I just said, what would be fun to write as a screenplay? And those are three of them. The first one, Cat Problem, is about this secret Pentagon program in which the government tries to come up with a green or eco-friendly weapon of mass destruction. So what they do is they come up with a strain of rabies affecting only cats, and that is not transmissible to other life forms. And so they infect a bunch of cats and sick them on this small town in Colorado that has the world's largest feral cat population. Kind of like, I got the idea from the 60 Minutes episode I saw. Apparently in Istanbul in Turkey, there are lots of semi-domesticated cats wandering around. People just take care of them. They're everywhere. It's kind of like it's one of the most attractive things about the city. And so I was thinking, what if you had this city that was just overrun with cats and it was their primary source of income and everything was cutesy-fied, to the level of obscenity. And suddenly all of these cats everyone loves start to eat everybody. And so that's what the story is about, and it focuses around a cheerleader who is trying to rescue her secret crush with the aid of her secret crush's brother and the shop teacher, who actually isn't a shop teacher. He's a retired military guy who teaches shop out of the Anarchist Cookbook and is an expert in weapons and man traps and all kinds of other things. So it's comedic and it's really gory at the same time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you're dealing with social tropes there as well, like a cheerleader who's toting a gun. It's already a subversive image. And I think that's sort of, one thing I really like about your work is it's very specific and we kind of know what we're getting into. The last one, little, it's not little, I want to talk about this book. I love this one. And you talked to me about A Disgusting Supermarket of Death, which is a great title, as sort of little espresso shots of horror. Is that how you sort of describe this?
Yes.
Almost everyone is what? How many words do you know, or how much length? 4 pages, 5 pages?
Well, 10. I think that they were all about 12 to 1,500 words, except a couple of them were longer than that. But by and large, that was it. And I prefer to write small. It's like the sniper motto, aim small, miss small. And I've never been a big fan of huge or lengthy fiction. I think most of it's either overwritten, or if it isn't overwritten, it's about something that really doesn't interest me. And I'm a huge fan of the old EC comics, which in 5 to 7 pages would deliver a wallop of a horror, crime, or science fiction story. And the old-time radio, like Inner Sanctum, Suspense, The Shadow, which in 25 minutes, would also deliver a very powerful story. And I think I learned to think in those units in some ways. I taught myself to think in longer units, writing screenplays. But, I think that a lot of fiction, not just horror or science fiction, but a lot of it just has what I would call filler or needless subplots, or, I don't understand. Maybe people think that they're not getting their money's worth unless they have 600 pages to plow through. That's just not me, and it's never been me, and it probably never will be me. And I'm fine with that.
Right. Well, that's what I like about all of these. They all seem very tightly constructed. There doesn't seem to be a lot of fat in there. It seems like they were written very quickly, too. They have a sense of urgency as well. So I think that's really a signature of your work. Do you, let's talk, kind of wrap this up. Talk a little bit about anything else you might have coming up, and and where we can get the books. It's just in time for Halloween. They make great gifts. It's really nice to have this one on your coffee table, Disgusting Supermarket of Death. I like to put them all on my coffee table so that when people come over, they kind of know that this is not the Leave It to Beaver household. This is not Father Knows Best household. So there you go.
Well, there's a morgue scene in Stay Alive too. Like you can see the toe tag of the guy prominently in the lower right corner. All of these are available, and I assume there are show notes for this.
Yep.
At my website, jamesharberson.com. There are links there for various places you can get it: Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com. You can get it either in print or electronically. And my website also features a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights audio drama I did that came out in 2018, and a link to a short story that Chilling Tales for Dark Nights published in 2021.
That's not included in any of these other books,
Right,
correct?
right.
Right. Cool. And so, wrapping this up, how do you find your place in the world today? As someone like me, someone like you, we were weird. We're still weird. How do you encourage people who are like, I don't know what I want to do. I really want to write, but how can I write? And do you have any advice for young people who might be out there thinking, I'm a creative person, but I don't have a chance?
Well, I
don't know if it's that dramatic, but I guess what I'm trying to say is you come from a really traditional sort of career background and then made this big shift, which I'm sure was not easy. And I'm just saying to you, do you have any advice for anybody that wants to live a creative life and still be able to be successful or can eat?
I guess you have to define what you mean by successful. I think that if you're able to execute and complete a story or work of art, that in and of itself is a form of success, because lots of people just procrastinate or they start something and never finish it. And then if you want to get it published or in front of as many people as possible, a lot of that is it's either luck and endurance and hard work, because there's so much information out there, so much content,
right,
and it comes so quickly at you that, we have a real lack of curation in our culture.
Uh-huh.
And the biggest thing you can do is to get your stuff in front of a curator who likes it and will show it to or persuade other people to buy it.
That's a really good point. So as a writer, I've dealt with that too. It's like, your audience, right? So you're not sending Stay Alive to Hallmark Channel. So I know that sounds really obvious, but I've struggled with a lot with that with a writer too. I'll get some kind of rejection, and I'll be really upset, and my friend will be like, "What do you care? Those people, that they would have just messed it up anyway, right?" So I think
They'd probably send it back with
right.
a restraining order.
So that's a really good tip, and I think that can be heated. I think a lot of young writers get really overwhelmed with the submission process, and they're like, "I'll just send it anywhere." Don't send it anywhere. Just send it to people that you really know would like it. And
you also have to be not afraid to fail and to know when criticism is constructive and simply coming from someone who either doesn't care for what you're doing, is envious of what you're doing, or hasn't paid enough attention to form an intelligent opinion.
Or lots of times somebody wants to rewrite it, and it's not the story you wanted.
Yes.
But my note, and again, we'll wrap up soon, my note is if you get the same note over and over again from somebody, from different people, that's really handy. But Jim, thanks for coming by today. We're really looking forward to the next piece.
I'm working on a film project that hopefully will come to fruition in 2025.
Cool. And I highly recommend this work. It's not even my genre, and I like it. It makes me kind of feel guilty when I'm reading it sitting over in a corner. All right, so that's our first book buzz. And check out all the arts and entertainment news and Craig's to-do list at WWNYTV.com.
Thank you.